The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any living species. It stretched so wide that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. Thousands of alien delegates sat in rows that curved upward like the inside of a bowl, and every seat was full. The air smelled like metal and old stone, and the silence was so heavy it pressed against the skin. In the center of that enormous room, a girl stood alone. Her name was Hana. She was 19 years old. She was human. She wore a thin gray uniform that was too big for her, and her feet were bare against the cold black floor. Her wrists were locked inside glowing rings of blue energy that hummed softly every time she moved. There was a bruise on her left cheek and dried blood near her hairline, but her eyes were steady. She was not crying. She was not shaking. She simply stood there and looked at the beings who wanted to kill her. Grand Arbiter Veloth rose from his seat at the highest point of the chamber. He was Delvari, an insectoid species that had ruled the council for over 600 years. His body was tall and thin, covered in dark plates that clicked when he moved. His eyes were black and wet, and they showed nothing. No anger, no pity, nothing at all. He spoke, and his voice echoed through the chamber like a crack in glass. The human designated Hana is charged with unprovoked cognitive assault against Ambassador Dorath of the Delvari hegemony. She deployed an unregistered biological ability, classified under Galactic Code as a neural weapon. She invaded the ambassador's mind without consent, causing severe psychological destabilization and public humiliation. Hana closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered what had actually happened. She remembered Ambassador Dorath standing in a hallway, alone, his body shaking, his neural patterns collapsing in on themselves. She had seen the signs because she had studied them. A psychic breakdown. Rare in Delvari, but fatal if untreated. His mind was folding, and no one was coming to help. So she helped. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She reached out with the gift that the Maru 7 colony collapse had burned into her brain, and she pushed calm toward him. Warmth. Safety. The feeling of being held when you are falling apart. It worked. His mind stabilized. He stopped shaking. He looked at her with those black, wet eyes, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt before. Not Delvari logic. Not cold calculation. He felt human emotion, raw and bright and overwhelming, and it broke him wide open in front of everyone. Not because he was in pain, but because he did not know what happiness felt like, and it terrified him. That was her crime. She had made someone feel something beautiful, and they had called it an attack. Veloth continued reading the charges, but Hana was not listening anymore. She was looking at the faces around her. Thousands of aliens, from hundreds of species. Some had scales, some had wings, some were made of light. None of them looked at her like she was a person. They looked at her like she was a problem that needed to be solved. The council has voted, Veloth said. 11 in favor, 1 against. The sentence is death by neural dissolution, to be carried out publicly in this chamber and broadcast live to all inhabited systems. Execution will begin in 30 minutes. A murmur ran through the chamber, not of shock, of satisfaction. Hana felt her legs go weak, but she locked her knees and stayed standing. She would not fall. Not in front of them. In the far corner of the chamber, a tall, graceful being made of soft blue light stood up. This was Speaker Ilindra of the Silvani Collective, the only delegate who had voted against the execution. She spoke, and her voice was like wind through leaves. This is wrong. The evidence does not support this sentence. The girl healed him. Your own medical records confirm it. Veloth turned his black eyes toward her. The medical records have been reviewed and deemed inconclusive. The vote stands. Sit down, speaker. Ilandra did not sit. But she did not speak again. There was nothing more she could do inside this room. Hana looked up at the ceiling. Somewhere past that ceiling, past the metal and the rock and the emptiness of space, there were other humans. Not many. Humanity was the youngest species in the galactic community. They had arrived only 11 years ago, and most aliens still treated them like children who had wandered into a room full of adults. Primitive, emotional, dangerous in the way that a small fire is dangerous, not because it is strong, but because you cannot predict where it will spread. She wondered if any of them knew what was about to happen to her. 3 levels below the grand chamber, in a small dark room that smelled like recycled air and old coffee, a woman named Yuna sat in front of a wall of screens. She was a human communications officer, and she had been monitoring the council broadcast as part of her daily routine. When the verdict was read, her hands stopped moving. Her breath stopped. Her heart did something painful in her chest. Then she moved faster than she had ever moved in her life. Her fingers flew across the console, and she sent a single encrypted message to one person. Just 5 words. They are killing Hana live. The message traveled through layers of security, bounced off 3 relay nodes, and arrived in a room even darker than Yuna's. A man sat alone in that room. His name was Teho. He was in his early 30s, with a calm face and quiet eyes that had seen things most people could not imagine. He was a human military attaché, and officially, he had no authority on this station. Officially, he was nobody. He read Yuna's message. He did not gasp. He did not swear. He did not punch a wall or cry out. He simply closed his eyes and sat perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something changed in him. Something old and deep and very, very dangerous woke up behind his quiet eyes. He opened his eyes. He pressed his calm. Gather, he said. 1 word. That was all. Across Galactic Station Aureus, 4 humans received that single word at the same moment. Jiwan the medic set down her cup of tea without finishing it. Su Bin, the engineer, closed her toolbox and stood up. Du Yun, the intelligence operative, deleted every file on his screen and walked out of the room. Yuna locked her console and pulled up a second hidden system she had built herself. None of them asked questions. None of them hesitated. They had trained for this. Not this exact situation, but for the principle behind it. The principle was simple. It was the oldest rule humanity had, older than language, older than fire. You do not leave your people behind. The clock on the chamber wall read 30 minutes. Teho walked through the corridor like a man going to get coffee. His steps were even. His breathing was slow. His hands hung loose at his sides. Anyone who saw him would think he was calm. They would be wrong. He was not calm. He was focused, and those were 2 very different things. His calm buzzed 4 times in quick succession. 4 confirmations. 4 people saying the same thing without words. We are moving. He checked the time. 27 minutes left. In the communications room, Yuna's fingers danced across 3 screens at once. She had spent 2 years quietly mapping the station's entire broadcast network, learning its structure the way a river learns the shape of a valley. She knew every signal path, every relay, every frequency. Now she used that knowledge. She did not jam the council's broadcast. That would have been easy and useless. They would fix it in seconds. Instead, she did something much smarter. She reached into the broadcast signal and made it stronger. She widened it. She sharpened it. She made sure that every screen on every ship in every system in the galaxy would show what happened next in perfect, beautiful clarity. Whatever was coming, the whole universe was going to see it. Signal enhanced, she whispered to herself. You wanted the galaxy to watch a girl die? Fine. The galaxy watches. but they see everything. 14 levels below the Grand Chamber, Subin dropped through a maintenance hatch into the station's infrastructure core. It was a massive space, filled with pipes and cables and machines that hummed like sleeping giants. She had worked here for 3 years. She knew every system, every wire, every backup generator by name. Not their official names. She had given them her own names, the way a gardener names her plants. She did not break anything. She did not cut any wires. She simply opened panels and rerouted connections. Power lines that fed the Grand Chamber's lighting now ran through a switch she controlled. Gravity generators that kept the chamber floor stable now answered to her tablet. Life support, emergency systems, security barriers, all of it still worked perfectly. But now, it worked for her. She checked the time, 22 minutes. Du-Yun was already inside the Council's security network. He had been inside it for 6 months. No one knew. That was what Du-Yun did. He existed in the spaces between systems, in the gaps that security teams forgot to check. He was not a fighter. He was a ghost, and ghosts do not need weapons. He mapped the guard positions around the Grand Chamber. 40 Torvan soldiers, the reptilian species that served as the Council's military arm. Big, strong, well-trained. Each one carried a plasma lance and wore armor that could stop most projectiles. They stood in 2 rings around the chamber entrance, 20 in each ring, and they looked like they were carved from stone. Du-Yun studied them for 30 seconds. Then he sent the full map to Taeho, guard positions, rotation timing, armor weak points, camera angles, everything. He also sent a note. 40 guards, no blind spots, front door is suicide. Taeho read the message and kept walking toward the front door. In the medbay closest to the Grand Chamber, Ji-Won laid out her tools with the care of an artist preparing her brushes. Surgical patches, neural stabilizers, own sealant, pain suppressors. She prepared for every kind of injury she could imagine, but she prepared most heavily for neural damage. She had read the execution order, neural dissolution. It meant they were going to take Hana's mind apart piece by piece while she was still awake. If the disruptor activated, even for a few seconds before they could stop it, Hana would need immediate care. Ji-Won's hands were perfectly steady. They were always steady. Even when her heart was breaking, her hands knew their job. She checked the time. 18 minutes. Inside the Grand Chamber, Hana stood on the execution platform. A machine had been brought in and placed 3 meters in front of her. It was smooth and white and shaped like a flower, and it was the ugliest thing she had ever seen. This was the neural disruptor. When activated, it would send a focused beam into her brain and slowly unravel her consciousness. The process would take approximately 4 minutes. She would be aware for all of it. The chamber was filling with sound now. Delegates talked among themselves. Some were excited. A few looked uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to speak. The broadcast cameras floated above like silver insects, capturing every angle. Hana looked at the neural disruptor and made herself breathe. In and out, in and out. She thought about Earth, which she had never seen. She thought about her mother, who died on Maru 7 when the colony collapsed. She thought about the way sunlight looked in old photographs, warm and golden and soft. She thought about all the things she would never touch. Her hands started to shake. She grabbed one with the other and held on tight. Not yet. Do not break yet. On the main corridor leading to the Grand Chamber, Taeho reached the security checkpoint. The 40 Torvan guards stood in perfect formation, blocking the massive doors. Commander Rokai watched from a balcony above, his reptilian eyes tracking the human with open curiosity. Taeho stopped. He stood in front of 40 soldiers, each one twice his size, and he did not look small. He looked like a stone in a river, something the current would have to move around, because it would never move through. He spoke, not in the common trade language, in perfect Delvari, the tongue of the ruling species. Every click, every tonal shift, flawless. I am here for my citizen. Step aside, or this station learns what humanity looks like when it stops being polite. The guards did not step aside. Several of them laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the walls. Taeho did not react. He simply raised his wrist and pressed a button. At that moment, every delegate inside the grand chamber felt their personal communication device vibrate. Every single one. Veloth's device hummed against his dark shell. Ilindra's glowed against her luminous skin. Rokai felt his buzz inside his armor. They opened the message. First, the real sensor data from the hallway where Hana had encountered Ambassador Dorath, showing clearly that his neural patterns were collapsing before she intervened and stable after. Second, the ambassador's own medical records, which had been sealed by the Delvari government, confirming that Hana's actions had saved his life. Third, a single line of text: "You are not executing a criminal. You are murdering a girl who saved a life. The galaxy is watching, all of it." The murmur that filled the chamber was different this time. It was not satisfaction. It was doubt. Taeho stood before the guards and waited. He checked the time. 3 minutes. Above them, the broadcast cameras kept recording. Yuna's enhanced signal carried every image, every sound, every whisper to 1 trillion screens across the galaxy. Somewhere in the infrastructure core, Subin's finger hovered over her tablet. Somewhere in the shadows, Do-Yun watched through cameras that did not belong to him. Somewhere in a medbay, Ji-Wan stood ready. 5 humans, 1 station, 30 minutes that were about to change everything. Taeho looked at the guards. He looked past them, through the doors he could not see through, to the girl he knew was standing alone inside. "Last chance," he said quietly. The guards raised their weapons. Taeho nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. "Subin," he said into his comm, "lights out." The darkness came all at once, like the universe had closed its eyes. Every light in the grand chamber died. The floating cameras flickered but stayed on, powered by their own batteries, still recording, still broadcasting. Yuna had made sure of that. The galaxy would not miss a single second. Inside the chamber, 10,000 aliens sat in sudden blackness. Some gasped. Some screamed. The Torvan guards shouted orders to each other, their voices echoing and crashing together. The Delvari delegates clicked their shells in panic. Only the Sylvani remained calm, because their bodies made their own light, and Alindra glowed like a blue star in the dark sea of chaos. At the execution platform, the neural disruptor had already been activated. In the seconds before the lights died, Grand Arbiter Veloth had given the order to proceed early. He had seen the data packet Taeho sent. He had seen the doubts spreading through the chamber, like poison. So he did what powerful beings do when they feel control slipping. He moved faster. The disruptor fired for exactly 4 seconds before the power died. 4 seconds of a focused beam drilling into Hana's mind, pulling at the edges of her thoughts like fingers tearing paper. She screamed. It was not a loud scream. It was a small broken sound, the sound of a person feeling their own mind start to come apart. And because Yuna's broadcast was carrying everything in perfect clarity, 1 trillion beings across the galaxy heard that scream. On a Torvan warship, a soldier stopped eating and stared at his screen. On a Sylvani homeworld, a child grabbed her mother's hand. On a small human colony at the edge of known space, an old man closed his eyes and whispered a name he had not said in years. Then the disruptor went dark, killed by Subin's power cut, and Hana collapsed to the floor, gasping, alive, damaged, but alive. In the same moment, Do-Yun sent a signal from wherever he was hiding, and the energy restraints around Hana's wrists flickered and died. She was free. She lay on the cold floor in the darkness, breathing hard, her hands pressed against her temples, trying to hold her thoughts together. And then Taiho moved. What happened next lasted 12 seconds. The broadcast cameras captured it in night vision mode, and the footage would be studied by military experts from every species for decades. They would slow it down, they would analyze every frame, they would write papers and hold conferences and build training programs around it, and none of them would fully understand what they were seeing. Taiho walked into 40 armed Torvan soldiers in complete darkness. He could not see them, they could not see him, but the Torvan had thermal vision. They could sense his body heat, and they knew exactly where he was. It did not help. He moved through them the way water moves through stones. Every motion was simple: a hand on a wrist, a step to the side, a gentle push at the right angle. He did not punch, he did not kick, he did not use any technique that any alien species had ever recorded. He simply touched them, and they fell, one by one, by one. Later, the Torvan would describe it in different ways. Some said it felt like their bodies just stopped listening to them. Some said it was like falling asleep while standing. One guard, a veteran of 30 years, said it was the strangest thing he had ever experienced, because in the moment Taiho touched him, he felt completely safe, as if his body trusted this human so deeply that it simply let go. 40 soldiers, 12 seconds, not one drop of blood. When Subin turned the lights back on, the Grand Chamber saw something that should have been impossible. 40 Torvan guards lay on the ground in neat, even rows. Their armor was unscratched. Their weapons were stacked in a careful pile against the wall. They were breathing peacefully, some of them already sitting up, looking confused but unharmed. And in the center of the chamber, between the fallen guards and the execution platform, Taiho stood with his hand on Hana's shoulder. She was sitting on the floor behind him, still pressing her hands against her head. He stood over her like a wall, like a door that would never open. He was smiling. Not a victory smile. It was the quiet, tired smile of a man who had done what needed to be done, and wished he had not needed to do it. The chamber was absolutely silent. 10,000 aliens stared at one human man and did not breathe. Jiwon appeared from a side corridor, running, her medical bag already open. She dropped to her knees beside Hana and began working immediately, pressing a neural stabilizer against Hana's temple, whispering softly to her, "I am here. You are safe. I am here." Hana's eyes were unfocused, swimming with pain, but she heard Jiwon's voice, and she grabbed her hand and held on like it was the only solid thing in the universe. Taiho turned to face the council. The broadcast cameras followed him. A trillion eyes watched. He looked up at Grand Arbiter Veloth, who sat frozen on his high seat, his black eyes wide, for the first time in centuries. He looked at the delegates, who stared at him with a mixture of fear and something else, something they could not name. He looked at Commander Rokai on the balcony, who was standing very still, with his hand over his chest, in a gesture that, among Torvan, meant deep respect. Then Taiho spoke. His voice was calm. It was not loud, but the chamber was so silent that it carried to every corner, to every microphone, to every screen in the galaxy. You sentenced a teenager to public death because she felt sorry for someone. You put her in chains because she showed mercy to a man whose own people would have let him die. You called compassion a weapon. He paused. He looked at the 40 guards on the ground, then back at the council. So let me show you the difference. What Hana did was mercy. What I just did was violence. She saved a life. I took apart your best soldiers in the dark with my bare hands, and I left them breathing. We carry both things inside us, the kindness and the storm. And you just showed the entire galaxy which one we use first and which one we keep in reserve. Silence. The kind of silence that changes history. Then Speaker Elindra stood up. Her body was glowing brighter than it ever had, and her light filled the chamber like a sunrise. She raised her hands and pressed them together, then slowly pulled them apart. It was a Silvani gesture of honor. Then she did something that was not Silvani at all. She brought her hands together flat and began to clap, a human gesture. She had learned it from Hana, months ago, during a cultural exchange. The sound of her clapping echoed through the silent chamber. One pair of hands, alone. Then a Torvan delegate stood and clapped. Then a small furry creature from a species no one could name stood and clapped. Then another, and another, and another. It spread through the chamber like fire through dry grass. Species that had never agreed on anything, agreed on this. The sound of hundreds of hands, and claws, and wings and tentacles, all pressing together, filled the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, and it was the loudest sound that room had ever held. Grand Arbiter Veloth sat perfectly still. His black eyes moved from face to face. He opened his mouth to speak, to command silence, to restore order. No sound came out. For the first time in 600 years, the most powerful being in the galaxy had nothing to say. On the floor, Hana looked up through her pain and her tears and saw the chamber full of light and sound. She did not understand all of it, but she understood enough. She was alive. Her people had come for her, and the galaxy had watched. The broadcast was seen by an estimated 9 trillion beings across 412 star systems. Within 1 hour, it became the most watched event in the recorded history of the galactic community. Within 6 hours, it had a name. Every species called it something different, but they all meant the same thing. The humans translated it simply as the 27 minutes. On Galactic Station Aureus, the hours after the event were strange and quiet. The grand chamber was emptied and sealed. Delegates returned to their quarters in silence, walking past one another without speaking, as if they had all just woken from the same dream and were not sure what was real. The Torvan guards, who had been taken down by Teho, were examined by their own doctors and declared completely unharmed. Not a bruise, not a scratch. This fact troubled the Torvan more than any injury would have. Commander Rokai released a public statement within 3 hours. It was short and direct, the way Torvan always communicated. He said that the Torvan Empire had trained soldiers for 10,000 years. He said that in all that time, no single fighter had ever defeated 40 Torvan warriors in close combat. He said that the human Teho had done it in 12 seconds, in complete darkness, without a weapon, and had left every one of them alive and unharmed. He said that this was not the action of a dangerous species. This was the action of a species that could destroy you, and chose not to. He said the Torvan recognized strength, and they recognized mercy, and they had never seen both in the same hands before. He formally requested a military alliance with humanity. The statement spread across the galaxy like light from a new star. In the Silvani collective, Speaker Ilindra moved quickly. She filed an emergency motion to overturn Hana's conviction, attaching the full medical evidence that proved Hana had saved Ambassador Dorat's life. The evidence had been available before the trial, but the Delvari government had sealed it. Now it was public, released in Teho's data packet and broadcast to every system. Ilindra's motion was supported by 73 species. The vote to overturn was held within 12 hours, and it passed with the largest majority in council history. Hana was formally exonerated. Her record was cleared. The execution order was erased as if it had never existed. But everyone knew it had existed. That was the point. In the Delvari hegemony, Grand Arbiter Veloth attempted to control the damage. He ordered the broadcast footage blocked in all Delvari systems. His technicians worked for hours to suppress it. Yuna's broadcast enhancement had embedded the signal so deeply into the galactic communication grid that blocking it would have required shutting down the grid itself. The footage played on every Delvari screen, in every Delvari home, on every Delvari ship. And something unexpected happened. The Delvari, a species that had built its entire civilization on the rejection of emotion, watched a human girl scream in pain because she had dared to show compassion. They watched their own government try to kill her for it. They watched a man walk through 40 soldiers without hate in his heart. And for many of them, something cracked. It was small at first. Questions whispered in private rooms. Why was the medical evidence hidden? Why did the ambassador's own records confirm the human girl helped him? What would it feel like to feel what she felt? That last question was the dangerous one. It spread through Delvari society like a crack in ice, and Veloth could not stop it. Young Delvari began seeking out information about human emotions. Underground groups formed, sharing translated human literature, music, and art. They called themselves the Opened, and within weeks they numbered in the millions. Veloth's grip on power, which had seemed unbreakable for 6 centuries, had developed its first fracture. In the human medical wing on Aureus, Hana lay in a bed that was too white and too clean. Jiwan sat beside her, monitoring the neural stabilizer attached to her temple. The disruptor had been active for only 4 seconds, but 4 seconds was enough to leave marks. Hana had headaches that came in waves, moments where sounds felt too loud and lights felt too bright. Jiwan told her it would pass. The brain was good at healing itself, especially a human brain. Especially Hana's brain. Your empathic centers are actually stronger than they were before, Jiwan said, reading her scans with quiet amazement. It is like the disruptor tried to tear them down, and they grew back thicker. Your body fought back. Hana did not feel strong. She felt tired and small and scared. She kept her hands folded in her lap and stared at the wall. Teho came to see her on the second day. He brought her a cup of tea from the human kitchen, real tea made with real leaves that someone had brought from Earth. He sat in the chair next to her bed and did not speak for a long time. He was good at silence. Finally, Hana asked the question that had been living inside her chest since the moment the lights came back on. Why did you come for me? Teho looked at her. His face was calm, the way it always was, but his eyes were warm. Because you are one of us, he said. That is the only reason we have ever needed. Hana looked at her tea. Steam rose from it in thin white lines. They would have let me die. Every species in that room would have watched me die and done nothing. Not every species, Teho said. Ilindra stood up. Rokai did not look away. And there were others, beings in that chamber, who felt sick about what was happening, but did not know how to stop it. But you knew how. Yes. Because you are a soldier. Teho shook his head. Because I am human. Soldiers follow orders. Humans follow their people. Hana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, The galaxy is different now, is it not? Teho took a slow breath. Yes, and it will never go back. He was right. Across the galaxy, human embassies reported a sudden and massive increase in requests for contact. Alien species that had ignored humanity for 11 years now wanted to meet them, talk to them, understand them. They sent diplomats and scientists and artists and children. They all wanted to know the same thing. What does it feel like to feel? Some of them were curious. Some were afraid. Some were hungry for something they did not have a word for. But they all came, and the humans welcomed every one of them, because that was what humans did. They opened the door, and they let you in, and they gave you tea, and they listened. Humanity's position in the galactic community shifted, not with a war, not with a treaty, not with a show of force. It shifted with a scream, and a rescue, and a smile in the dark, and a man who could have killed 40 soldiers, and chose to let them live. They were no longer the youngest species, stumbling and small, and easy to ignore. They were something new, something the galaxy had never had before. Not rulers, not conquerors, not weapons. The old species had a word for what they were becoming, but they did not like to say it, because it frightened them. The word was necessary. 6 months passed, and Galactic Station Aureus was not the same place it had been. The corridors that humans once walked with their heads down, staying close to the walls, staying quiet, staying small, those same corridors now parted when they walked through. Not out of fear, not exactly. It was something closer to awareness. When a human passed, other species noticed. They looked. They nodded. Some of them even smiled, a gesture they had learned from watching the broadcast footage so many times that it had become familiar. Hana noticed the change more than anyone, because she walked those corridors every day on her way to the Grand Chamber. The same Grand Chamber where she had stood in chains and waited to die. The same room where she had screamed. She walked into it now through the front doors, and she sat in a chair that had been built for her, and she spoke to the same delegates who had voted to kill her. She was the first human empathic ambassador. The title had not existed 6 months ago. The Galactic Council had created it specifically for her, not as an apology, though it was partly that, but because they needed her. Disputes between species that had lasted centuries were being resolved in hours, because Hana could sit between two delegates who hated each other and help them feel what the other felt. Not force them, never force. She simply opened a door in their minds and let them look through it. Some species were afraid of this ability. Some thought it was manipulation. Hana understood their fear. She had been executed for it once, almost. So she was careful. She always asked permission. She always explained what she was doing, and she always gave them the choice to say no. Very few said no. Grand Arbiter Veloth was no longer Grand Arbiter. 3 months after the broadcast, the Delvari hegemony had quietly replaced him. The official reason was administrative restructuring. The real reason was that his own people had stopped trusting him. The opened movement had grown beyond anyone's ability to contain it, and young Delvari were asking questions that the old government could not answer. Veloth disappeared into private life, and no one spoke his name in the Grand Chamber anymore. The new Delvari representative was younger and uncertain, and deeply curious about humans. She attended every one of Hana's sessions and took notes. Teho had changed too, though he would not have admitted it. The Galactic Council had created a new military body called the Cooperative Defense Unit, a joint force made up of soldiers from every willing species, designed to protect the community without serving any single government. They asked Teho to lead it. He said no 3 times before he said yes, and when he said yes, he had one condition. "We do not fire first," he said. Ever. Not for any reason. If we cannot solve a problem without shooting, then we have not tried hard enough. The council agreed because they had seen what Teho could do without firing at all. Within 6 months, the Cooperative Defense Unit had handled 14 border disputes, 3 piracy operations, and 1 attempted genocide. And they had not fired a single shot. Teho trained soldiers from dozens of species, and the first thing he taught every one of them was the same. The goal is not to win. The goal is to make winning unnecessary. The Torvon loved him. Commander Rokai assigned his best officers to the unit and told them to learn everything the human could teach. He defeated 40 of us with open hands, Rokai reminded them. Imagine what he could teach you with an open mind. Yuna built something she had been dreaming about for years. She called it the Signal. It was a broadcast network, completely open, completely free, impossible to block or censor. Any being in the galaxy could use it to share information, and no government could shut it down. Yuna had designed it that way on purpose, embedding it so deeply into the galaxy's communication infrastructure that removing it would be like removing blood from a body. The signal became the most trusted source of information in the galactic community within 3 months. When governments lied, the signal carried the truth. When people suffered in silence, the signal carried their voices. Yuna ran it from a small room on Orius with 2 assistants and a coffee machine that was always broken, and she never once put her name on it. Subin's contribution was quieter, but no less important. She designed and built what she called empathy chambers, small rooms scattered across the station where alien species could safely experience simulated human emotions. The technology was delicate and beautiful. A being would enter the chamber, and Subin's machines would gently create the neural conditions for a specific emotion: happiness, sadness, wonder, grief, love, and the being would feel it for the first time. The chambers became the most visited spaces on Orius. There were always lines. Some species came once out of curiosity and never returned. Others came every day, sitting in the soft light, feeling things they had no words for, tears running down faces that had never cried before. Subin watched them through the observation window and felt a complicated kind of pride. She had given the galaxy a door into the human heart. What they did once they walked through it was up to them. Jiwan opened the first cross-species medical institute on the station. She combined human medicine with alien biotechnology, creating treatments that neither could have achieved alone. Her research was groundbreaking, but the moment she was most proud of was quiet and small. Ambassador Dorath, the Delvari diplomat whose life Hana had saved, the one whose breakdown had started everything, came to her clinic on a Tuesday afternoon. He came alone. He sat in her office and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "The girl, Hana. What she did to me, what she made me feel. I have not been able to stop thinking about it." Jiwan listened. "It was warm," he said. "I did not know things could be warm." Jiwan smiled and handed him a cup of tea. He held it in his hands and looked at the steam rising from it, and his black eyes were softer than any Delvari eyes had ever been. Doyun disappeared, as he always did. Teho did not worry about him. Doyun had a way of being exactly where he needed to be, and nowhere else. Reports trickled in from across the galaxy. Small things. A corrupt official exposed here, a secret weapons program shut down there. A kidnapped child returned to her parents on a world no one watched. Doyun's fingerprints were on none of it. That was how you knew it was him. On a quiet evening, 6 months and 3 days after the broadcast, Hana stood at a viewport on the outer ring of Orius. The station orbited a dead star, a cold, dark sphere that gave no light and no heat. Hana had always thought it was sad, a star that had burned through everything it had and now just drifted in the dark with nothing left to give. Tonight she did not think it was sad. She thought it was patient. Teho found her there. He came and stood beside her, and for a while they just looked out at the dark together. "They thought killing me would teach the galaxy to fear humans," Hana said. 6 months had given her a strength that was not loud or sharp. It was deep, like roots. Teho nodded. "Instead, saving you taught them something worse." Hana looked at him. "What?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. The same small, tired, honest smile he had worn when the lights came back on and the galaxy saw him standing over her. "That we are worth following." Hana looked back at the dead star. Beyond it, she could see the faint lights of ships moving in the distance. Torvan warships flying beside human transports. Sylvani vessels drifting next to Delvari freighters. Species that had never trusted each other, now traveling the same roads, drawn together by a broadcast, a scream, a rescue, and a question that none of them could stop asking. What does it feel like to feel? Hana pressed her hand against the cold glass of the viewport and watched the galaxy turn. It was so big, so old, so full of beings who had been alone inside their own minds for thousands of years, building walls between themselves and everything they did not understand. And now, because a girl had shown mercy, and a man had come for her, and a species had refused to leave one of its own behind, those walls were coming down. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. The galaxy was shifting, and it would never shift back. Hana smiled. She dropped her hand from the glass and turned away from the viewport. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for the first time since she had stood barefoot on that cold black floor, she was not afraid. She walked back into the station, back into the light, back into the galaxy that was learning, one feeling at a time, what it meant to be human.